to today. There's a few chapters that are formally written by me. There's a chapter about Pussy Riot. There's a chapter about punk in the provinces. And then there's some appendix chapters that are not oral histories, because those are complicated topics that I thought needed more explanation. So the history does start in 1978, and the earliest appearance of punk rock that I could find in the Soviet Union, and that is in Leningrad, and it goes all the way to today through Russia's tumultuous 1990s. The 90s decade was the worst economic decade for Russia after the collapse, and to the 2000s, the anti-fascist movement in the early 2000s. I came to researching the book because, as Justin said, I'm first and foremost, I guess, a punk rocker, but then also an academic. And I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to blend these two worlds, because as I was studying Russian, it was pretty easy for me, having some tattoos at the time, to connect with punk rockers in different Russian cities that I found myself in, and going to shows and just realizing in those spaces that not only did punk rock exist in Russia, but it has a really long and untold history that's much older than Pussy Riot. And I wanted to, as a historian, I wanted to start developing and telling that story. And you know, there are three. I kind of break the history down, the way that I approach it in the book, in three predominant ways. The first one is through shared experiences, or bearing witness to such a counterculture in the Soviet Union, and how people have seen it kind of come from pretty much non-existence or a highly repressive state, and go through the ups and downs of Russia's development in the last 30 years. And within those kind of historic trajectories, you have people, just like in the United States, but in a much faster pace, developing all the different identities that are so important for punk rock. The different musical styles of hardcore or crust punk or whatever it is, the sort of 77 proto-punk fans and people like that who through these years are kind of finding themselves in these identities. And most importantly, and the real heart of the entire book, of every chapter, is the importance of spaces throughout the entire history. Because for me, punk rock is primarily spaces that we occupy. So, for example, Cassie was talking about nude cleansing being a space. You're in somebody else's space doing a thing you do. Brontez was talking about the different, going on tours and playing different shows and kind of not having your own space. And then all of these venues, all of these cities being your temporary spaces where you have connections to people only because you're sharing that space together and you're aware of those identities. And then also Keith, of course, talking about the Moose Lodge, and that kind of being the place where punks came together and people saw what punks were doing and didn't necessarily like it. And so I thought there was no better way to organize such a huge history other than around the spaces that are so important for it. And so with the early years in Leningrad, you get the Leningrad Rock Club, people's various apartments, as Feddy will probably tell you about, his own home studio, which becomes a place for musicians from all around Leningrad to go and jam with him. You get state-sanctioned venues like the Leningrad Rock Club, where there are literally KGB agents that are in the venue. In the 90s, you start to get the appearance of DIY venues for the first time, Club Tom Tom and the Jerry Rubin Club in Moscow, where, again, you have the formation of identities, kind of apolitical in the 90s, but these different branches of punk rock articulating their place within this broader scene and within Russia itself, the new Russia. So then by the 2000s, you have the sort of purification of punk between neo-Nazis, who are a real problem in the early 2000s, and I guess everybody else, leftists, who form the anti-fascist scene, and those two groups forming their own spaces and literally going to war with each other on the streets over protecting these spaces. So again, the last chapter is about Pussy Riot. It's one that I wrote myself. It's not in the oral history format because I think that their place in this entire history is rather confusing. It's confusing for them. It's confusing for Russians who are a part of the scene, for hardcore kids or whoever it is. And so I thought that it would be better to explain it myself. I call it the paradox of Pussy Riot, that they both belong and don't belong. And I'm happy to answer questions about those, about that chapter. But because we have Feddy here, what I thought I would do is encourage Feddy to either read the sections from the Leningrad chapter that he is speaking in, or you can read it and embellish it and add more to it or whatever you want. And Feddy is probably the in my opinion, the star of the entire first half of the book. He's kind of this figure that when I first started researching the book, you come across all of these various Leningrad proto-punk bands that were striving for existence. And then I think a couple months into researching, Feddy contacted me and said, hey, I was actually a part of this anarcho-punk band that started in 1982, and the KGB told me that I couldn't play music anymore. And so, I mean, that story kind of just blew my mind because it was unlike anything else that other people were telling me. I mean, people were talking about the repression. They were talking about the restrictions on concerts and stuff like that, but nobody was actually telling stories about having to sign contracts about not playing music. And so Feddy kind of is a great person to have in this this talk, because he can give us that experience, that firsthand, that bearing witness to what it was like playing punk rock in the Soviet Union at the same time that Keith was playing shows in the Moose Lodge. Feddy was being interrogated by KGB agents, and I think that contrast is really interesting. And so, without further ado, I want to have Feddy read his parts of the book or embellish them or whatever he wants to do now. So, Feddy, please.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Am I with you? Okay, great. Great to be here. So I'm starting with reading this book because, this is a reading show. And this is the only one book that I'm having with me here. We just moved to Montenegro from Russia. I fortunately escaped it right before the coronavirus quarantine and lockdown in Russia. It's very safe in Montenegro. It's quite nice in here. And it's already summer. Wow, so let's go back to that history, It's quite crazy to be here early in the morning. The sun is coming up, as you see on the back of my of the window behind me, and I'm reading a book about so old story that happened to me more than 30 years ago. So let me read my own words, by the way. Okay. The rock club didn't inspire me to do anything else but create my own studio at home and never seek assistance or support. Some friends and I just gathered in my small room where I lived and jammed. There was no audience there. Our first band, Резиновый Ricochet, it's Rubber Ricochet in English, recorded 4 songs maybe, and we didn't even practice. Yes, it was literally, there was no practicing at all. We just had some fun staying in my small, very tiny room. And I had that home-based recording studio that was actually one real tape recorder, monophonic, by the way. A couple of microphones, my drum kit, and guitars there, and some sound system just to hear what we were doing. And practically we started recording just because we had no chance to hear what we were doing. So we needed to hear it somehow, one way or another. So I started recording it. We would just get together and decide to have two verses, 3 choruses, and 1 solo, and somehow we would stop the song. It took us 1 day to record an album, and the next day we would bring the record copies to our friends and ask them if it's okay, if it was okay. I think Отдел самоискоренения is my band. It's called Self-Eradication Department in English. So let's keep calling it this way. I think Self-Eradication Department released only 2 albums and 1 compilation. And meanwhile, there were about 6 records done by Народное ополчение. Народное ополчение, or People's Army, is another band that I joined as a musician and sound producer and songwriter. But my main band, and the first one, and the one that Alex mentioned as a band that I had to sign a contract that I wouldn't keep on working with anymore with KGB. It was Self-Eradication Department. I'm talking too much. Let's keep on reading.
No, it's fine.
When I created the first Self-Eradication Department record, I showed it to the last drummer I played with. He played with both bands, and he had some hippies taking drugs in his apartment. There was a lot of sketchy shit going on there. So when the KGB got a hold of the Self-Eradication Department record, he was more scared than all of us. He said someone stole this record from him. There were always people coming and going. Many things could have been stolen. For the KGB, this self-recording punk was an activity that was not allowed at all. Making records at home and then delivering them to different people. They heard anti-Soviet lyrics and some other things on our records. We even had some artwork on the tapes, and there were a lot of things on that as well. We were not the only band to be brought in for investigation, though. Most of the Leningrad Rock Club bands were invited there as well. But let me tell you, that KGB interrogation was actually the most terrible thing that happened to me. I was quite young. I was like 18 or 19 years old. I was just sent back from the army as a refugee. I refused to take the oath, being taken to the army forcefully, actually. And I spent some more than a month in a mental house, because that was the way to get back from the army. You had to go to the mental house, to hospital, to get a sign that you're not normal to be in army. So so they sent me back, and it was the summer of the 1984 when everything happened in my life. That was the army, then that was the mental hospital, and then we had those troubles with KGB. So I'll keep on reading about that. At the interrogation, they had a box of my things, which they slammed on the table and asked, "What the hell is this?" They had one guy walking behind me with a heavy book, trying to scare me, and I was really scared, by the way. The other was playing the good cop. As punishment, I was forced to sign an agreement that I would never have a band of that kind or write lyrics of that kind anymore. I would never shake the basic establishment of the country. And I signed it, of course. What else could I do? I was facing jail time. And there is a funny words that my bandmate said. He's dead already. Most of my bandmates are dead now. They were drug addicts, they were alcoholics, and unfortunately, I survived them all. I didn't take drugs in my life. I never even tried it. So yes, I'm here reading the words that one of my bandmates said. So it's the guy's name is Alex, also Alex, and he was a singer for the People's Army Band and the songwriter as well. So he said, they were ready to put me in jail for hooliganism, for the rude words in our songs. They said, we're gonna tell the prisoners about you so that you will get fucked up your ass. In a year, you will straighten up. I said, forgive me, guys. Can I bend my knees and kiss your boots? They were shocked. I can stand on my hands and knees, and you can fuck me right here. Never mind in jail. Shortly after saying this, they kicked me out. He was laughing. It's taken from a video. I saw this video. He was drunk, of course. It was taken, I think it was shoot at the late 90s. Well, he was still alive. But this guy had a very hard life by the end of his life. Down the street, Feddy, me, was waiting for me, dressed in underpants and a t-shirt with a red star painted on it, a swastika on top of the star, and the saying, no law for fools, on the back, yes. We went away and immediately got caught by the police again. They took us to an office on Fontanka Embankment, let me go and said, go fuck yourself, but the fool is staying. After that, Feddy stopped writing songs. It was really shitty. And that's true.
So thanks for doing that reading. I think it's great. It's great coming from you because, as I said, I mean, part of the whole genre of oral histories in punk. Punk has a rich history of oral histories. The tradition of it is the whole bearing witness to the development of punk or participating in punk. And so it's great to have people like you that can tell the story yourself, and and all I do is put it in an order that creates a bigger narrative arc. So yeah, that's the Soviet part of the history. There's in my personal opinion, the next most interesting part of the history is the anti-fascist scene that develops in the early 2000s, where it gets very, very violent and people are killed in Moscow and St. Petersburg primarily. And as I said, the story centers on spaces. All of the band names and the names of stores or whatever, they're all translated in the footnotes so that readers can easily look up what is being mentioned, or they can look up the bands themselves. And so it's a pretty reader-friendly book, I think, even for non-Russian experts or non-Russians. But so I wanted to end this brief. Usually these presentations that I do, they last about 45 minutes. And so I had to kind of condense this for Justin so that I could stay within the 20 minutes that we were given, and so that I could eventually get to bed, and Feddy probably back to bed too. But I wanted to end this by just mentioning the fanzine that I'm currently working on. It's just come out with its 10th issue, which is a zine about zines, and it has like Aaron Cometbus and Matt from Fluke is in it. And the purpose is, again, to explore these same themes that are in the book. These center on both identities in punk and how important they are, the variety of identities in punk, the spaces of punk, a zine being a literary space for punk rock, and the direct experience of being in punk. And so the next 2 issues of the zine, the next one is a zine dedicated to non-white punks, and so anybody who isn't white can contribute. And then the one after that is non-cis punks, so anybody who is non-cis can contribute. And the point is to explore these identities and get it out there to the community about how important it is to really be yourself in the punk scene. And so thanks for listening to Feddy and I do our thing.
Hey, thanks so much, guys. We wanted to open it up for Q&A. If anybody has any questions for our readers, if the rest of the readers wouldn't mind turning on their video and popping back up here. We just have a couple minutes left. And feel free to type your question into the chat. And our first question comes from Nikolai. And his question is, what kind of music influenced the people in the scene in the Soviet period? And how did punk music manage to find its way into the USSR?
I think Feddy can answer himself, but I'll say that the first punk that is talked about in the book is Svin, who translates to pig or swine in Russian. He's nicknamed that by his friends later on. He forms the band The Automatic Satisfiers, which is a Russian kind of parody on the Sex Pistols. Not really a parody, but it's borrowing directly from the Sex Pistols. And mostly that music, like the Sex Pistols, the Ramones, the Boomtown Rats, are transmitted through BBC radio interceptions that the Soviet people don't manage to jam. So, I mean, Feddy can talk for himself about his own influences back then.
Yeah, frankly, we heard the first punk songs from the radio. It was the BBC radio, Russian section of the BBC, and then the Voice of America, of course, and some Deutsche Welle. Maybe it was some other stations too, playing punk rock and explaining punk rock for Soviet citizens. This is how we knew about it. And talking about the Russian punk bands during the Soviet times, you have to understand that by the end of the 1985, the Soviet was over. Gorbachev came there and perestroika started. So in 2 years after those interrogations with the KGB and the struggles that I came through, the troubles, in 2 years, everything was legal. Everything was completely opened up. And every musician in the country, in the Soviet Union, became punk. So you have to understand that everything changes so crucially and so quickly, so fast. And you have to understand that I haven't stopped making music at all. I just stopped that band because I had to. And my family asked me to keep the silence, never speak about the punk past in my life. For ages, for decades, I didn't tell a word about that. I started new bands, I played in indie rock bands, I had a lot of projects. And only when Alexander Herbert came to Russia to write this book, to collect his interviews, to take them, I rebanded Self-Dedication the first time. And I wrote some new songs back then. It was a couple of years ago, and Putin started that war with the Ukraine. They seized Crimea, and it was a shock to me. And I wrote a couple of new songs to protest against it. But now I'm a sound producer and I'm writing. I just wanted to say about it. Sorry for messing the questions and answers, because I felt like something was wrong in what I was saying. Sorry for that.
No problem.
I have a new project. I have a new project. Alexander was saying about his other projects like zines and books. And just yesterday I read his chapter, an article about anarchist rebel in Kronstadt, which is very smart. Alexander is a very smart historian, I should say so.
Well, he has a PhD, so I would hope he's smart.
Yeah,
right.
she should be.
Rose
so
Lewis, I see you're popped up on the screen. Do you have a question, Rose? You have to unmute yourself.
I just wanted to say большое спасибо for being here and speaking with us. And I was wondering if either of you had like contemporary Russian bands that you wanted to recommend.
Contemporary?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. I mean, my favorite contemporary band, as in still existing, is Mraz, which translates to turd in Russian, or like squirt or some word like that. So
how do you spell it? Can you type it into the chat?
Yeah. And it depends. I mean, so the book also tries to cover the various varieties of punk, including hardcore. So Mraz is more of kind of like post-punk sung in Russian, and so the structure of the songs is kind of weird because the Russian language it's harder to write songs in the Russian language, I think, and so putting the music onto the words can lead to some really interesting things, I think, sometimes. There's a band from Nizhny Novgorod, which is a small provincial city, smaller. It's called Criminal State. They're pretty good. They're like a street punk band. And I think that in the chapter about punk today, which I compiled in 2015, the most important band for people who are my age in their 30s in Russia is probably the band Ricochet, which I'll write down. They don't exist anymore, but they were good. They were great. And they also sing in Russian too. So, but if you like the more poppy punk stuff, kind of like Green Day style, then Naive or Terakani, who are classics that started in the beginning of the 90s, they're still playing and they're still doing things.
Great, thank you.
Feddy might have some recommendations too.
Oh, not really. No. No, you know, I'm producing some punk records now. Recently, I've done. The guys keep on asking me to produce them, but I'm not recommending them because I know that since you are asking for the best, something best to hear, well, there's plenty of them. And it's hard to pick up one to say that it's the best one, unless they are your friends. But it's not fair. Then it's not correct.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. It's great hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Rose.
Thank you very much.
Someone just commented, what was the name of the band Alexander recommended that doesn't exist anymore? Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I just put it down there.
Okay, great. There's another question here. If you have your question, feel free to type it into the chat. The question is, does the book cover Siberian punk scene of the 80s?
Yeah, it does. There's a chapter after the Leningrad and Perestroika chapters about Siberian punk, which is a great question because when I started researching the book, originally I was just going to cover St. Petersburg and Moscow, the two capitals. But then everybody who knows anything about punk in Russia and the Soviet Union said, you absolutely have to cover Siberian punk and this strange phenomenon of punk that explodes in these faraway cities in Omsk and Novosibirsk in the middle of Siberia. And so there is a chapter about them, and the novelty about them, the really interesting part is that they were pretty political. At least one of them was the founder of all that. Yegor Letov in the band Grazdanskaya Obrona, or Civil Defense. He was pretty political, but because he's so far away from the seat of power in St. Petersburg and Moscow, it means he's a little bit safer from being found and arrested. Although his brother is arrested and he is eventually sent to a mental hospital as well for a little bit. But yeah, so there's a whole chapter there.
Thank you. And so I guess maybe we'll do about 10 more minutes of questions. So if anybody has any questions for Feddy or Alexander or Cassie, Brontez or Keith, feel free to type them in the chat. Are you still with us, Keith and Brontez, somewhere?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I have a question for Brontez, actually.
Okay. Brontez, Alexander has a question for you.
Okay.
So I was really impressed by your writing style. I think it's like, it's both, it sounds free flowing, but then it's also really creative. I don't know if it was just the way you were reading it, but I've read some of your stuff and I do genuinely like it all. And so I was kind of wondering, what's your process for writing this stuff? Do you have like certain nights where you just think like, oh fuck, I have to write this down because this is really good? Or do you like relegate time to doing that? Or what's your process for doing it?
Well, I spent $60,000 on a theater degree, so mostly my writing happens as inner monologues. And so what I say is I have to be able to recite it like a speech in my head before I commit it to writing it down. So that's one of the basic rules I use. But
Do you read it out loud to yourself after you've written it down and stuff?
I'll be fucking saying that shit to myself on BART, like in class, like in front of my friends while I'm having conversations. Like people think I'm fucking nuts, and I am.
I have a question for Cassie, and I know as someone who had a lot of weird jobs, the nude maid thing is weird, but I'm sure you've had an even weirder job than that. What were your top 3 weird jobs that come to mind, Cassie?
Well, pretty up there is I answered an ad for Home Companions Needed, which I thought I was going to get like an old person and have like a tender Tuesdays with Morrie type relationship with them. But instead it was this 44-year-old dude with a mullet named Wayne who'd been paralyzed in a motorcycle accident, and he was covered in hate tattoos. And then he made me drive him to pick up cigarettes and then to Sears to wheel around and look at tools. And then on the way back from the mall, he grabbed me with his good arm and was like, Cassie, and I thought he was like dying. So I was like, oh my God, what? And he was like, kiss me. And I was like, fuck you, and just punched him in the head. And then I had to sit with him like on his mother's porch for like 2 hours because I didn't know what to do. I was like, am I gonna get paid if I just leave him here, or like what is going to happen? So that was pretty up there. I worked at Torrid, which at the time was the plus size division of Hot Topic. And one of the managers tried to poison one of the other managers by pouring green cleaner into her like Mountain Dew that she had every morning. And then there was this like internal Torrid Hot Topic cover up of it, and then I ended up quitting. But that was pretty insane. I mean, there's been lots of horrible jobs. I asked my my nieces what I should write about, and one of them said that I should write about this job that I had where it was supposed to be a TV writing job, but instead it was for this talk show that was canceled after 6 months. And I had to just like, instead of writing, they gave me this job of like clipping funny parts from like reality shows. And like I liked talk shows before this, but like then it was like became twisted into this monkey's paw dream because they gave me every episode of Jerry Springer that's ever existed on DVD, and they made me watch it and look for like what was funny, and it just became this horrible nightmare of like, I guess I have to watch Jerry Springer for 6 hours today. So I did that for like 6 months, and it was that was really like mentally debilitating, I would say. So that was up there. Those are the ones that come to mind, but there's been a lot. Like there's been a lot.
Wait, they were trying to get you to find like the comedic dialogue in Jerry Springer?
Oh yeah, and they
Is that how comedy works? Like to go back to
Yeah, well, it was for a clip show called Crazy Talk. So they would show like clips of like what had happened in reality television, but then they ran out of stuff. So then they were like trying to cull the archives of reality television for
Weird.
funny things, but there was nothing. I mean, there's only so many like clips you could do of people getting hit on the head. And then finally, like I had gone through everything and I was like insane by the end of this process. And they were like, okay, let's just find stuff from the internet. So I was clipping things that were like, I was like, okay, I know weird, funny stuff from the internet. That's when I realized that what I think is funny is not necessarily what regular people think is funny. Because I was clipping like weird ASMR people, like heavily pronouncing stuff into special microphones on like Instagram. And they were finally like, look, we just want like people in bikinis falling down. So if you could get us like 10 of those a day, like that's all we really need. So that's kind of what I was doing that for a while. So that was a bad one.
My next question is for Brontez. So Brontez, one thing that really stood out to me in your reading is you were talking about the California garage rock scene, about how it's guys who look like the Fonz playing Jim Crow era rock and roll. And I remember seeing one of your first bands, Panty Raid, and you were playing guitar in Panty Raid. And what inspired you to pick up a guitar? Was it those same Jim Crow era rock and roll bands, or was it the newer stuff? What kind of music was it?
Yeah, it was Jim Crow era. Come on, like I was like, I think the first thing is like when I was a kid, I used to watch those Annette Funicello and Frankie Avalon movies, like, you know the one where like the girl is like dancing like that and she throws a spell, and I'm just like, yeah, that looks like fun. I'll play surf music, like. But I was thinking about it today though. It's like that whole scene. I don't know, something changed for me. Like when Trump became president, like, and I was just like kind of walking around, just like, I was like, man, I don't know if I want to hang out at this jamboree anymore. So I went and gave myself a mohawk, and I went total crust punk.
I don't know if we lost Keith. Is Keith still with us, or did he leave? He may have left. Well, I guess
I'm here.
Oh, you are
Yeah!
here.
I thought Keith was like,
Yeah.
fuck these hippies. Like,
Oh no. I've listened to everybody, and I'm really enjoying the scenario here.
My question for Keith, did the Circle Jerks ever play in Russia? Did you get to Eastern Europe or any of the ex-Soviet bloc countries? Were you on tour over there in the 80s in Europe?
No, we the furthest east I've ever been in Europe is like Slovenia, or some of those, like what used to be Czechoslovakia and Hungary, those countries. My newest band off, our drummer is Latino, and he's like, I can't go there. We had an offer to go to the Soviet Union to play a couple of shows in the Soviet Union, and he said, I can't go. They'll harass me. If you guys think you're going to get harassed as being musicians, I'm going to be harassed just because of the color of my skin. And of course, he plays in another band. He has his own band, and they've been to Russia probably a couple of times. So it's like, okay, whatever. The Circle Jerks, we've never been offered anything in the Soviet Union or Russia. We've had a couple of offers to go to China, and a lot of these places, especially right now, it's like you can't even get your passport, up to date because of the COVID scenario. So, I would love to go to these places. I would love to go to the Ukraine because my Russian lineage comes through the Ukraine, and I'm part Ukrainian Jew. So, I would love to go there, but if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, I mean, it's just, that's my philosophy. When it comes up and we can make it happen, then we'll go. If everything's lifted and we're allowed to travel and, everything's cool over there, then so be it. But as long as we've got the situation that's going on right now, nobody has any kind of a handle on it. It's like, I'm in no hurry to go anywhere. The Circle Jerks, we just had 70 shows canceled. And our drummer, the guy that's playing with us right now, he's got a newborn and a 2-year-old. And when you're a dad of kids and a baby, it's like you're in no hurry to be, you want to work, but at the same time, you're not going to get out there in the situation that we're in. And we're, unfortunately, for us being in bands or musicians or artists, we're the lowest rung on the ladder. We're going to be the last ones to be able to go out there and tour and go from a different city to a different city every night and be in one night be in a hot, sweaty room with 500 people, and then the next night be in a movie theater with 1,500 people, and they're just we're the low men on the totem pole, So
I
all
miss
we
the
can
smell
do
of somebody else's BO.
I don't because being here in California, we've been under a drought, and I don't go out. So the only person I offend by what's going on underneath here is just myself, and it's not that big of a deal. So I'll bathe maybe once or twice a week. I'm not going anywhere. I don't have anybody to impress, and if you don't like how I smell, then you're supposed to be wearing a mask anyways.
We're about ready to wind down. I guess I'd like all the readers to just go one by one. What are you guys doing to keep sane during this whole lockdown and coronavirus situation? What are you guys doing at home that you're really enjoying that you think other people should try, or are you just going crazy in general? I guess we can start with Feddy. I know you said the situation was pretty rough in Russia with the lockdowns, right?
Yes, in Russia it's a hell, but here in Montenegro it's quite cool. But by the way, this lockdown wasn't a surprise or something new for us, because right before we left here from St. Petersburg, we have been already at self-isolation, because we've sold already everything. We were ready and prepared to move. We were just waiting for the chance to go. And I was already sitting in, locked down and working from home. But the situation changed crucially when we got here, because for some reason, I don't know why, I got way more orders from more clients. I met some good people here, and I had some new offers to work with TV programs from Russia as soon as I moved here. So I started composing music for TV programs, and I just kept on working as if nothing's ever changed, Yes.
So your survival technique has just been to keep focusing on your work, in other words.
Yes. Yes, exactly. But probably, music became more popular since making music is it's the way to survive. So this is the reason why I have more work now, because it's they are my clients. They send music to mix to me, and by the way, I finished my own project. I had a lot of time to finish good songs that I started. I just had no time to do that before.
You're trying to release it, aren't you?
I spent great time, on the quarantine.
You're trying to release your new music, aren't you?
Yes, I'm looking for a label which are out of order now, but still I want to do something as a signed musician because I've never been signed. I always been an independent, so I want to find a company to support me with that. Floris Lava is the name of my new project. It's a sort of electro rock mixture.
Maybe if you can type it in the chat, folks can check it out.
I will do that. Yeah, I will do that.
And how about you, Cassie? What are you doing to keep sane during this whole thing? I know New York is particularly rough.
I'm not. I live in like the epicenter of death right now. Like it's just ambulances, helicopters overhead, people not wearing masks on the street, and it's pretty gnarly. So I've got custody.
Are you in Queens or Brooklyn?
I'm in Brooklyn, but it's pretty bad. I'm right down the street from like a public hospital, and it's gnarly. I've got custody my two nieces who are 9 and 6. So I've been homeschooling, and it's just something that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Like, I don't know why religious people do it when there's like options like sending your kid to school. I don't know why, but when this is all over, I'm gonna be really grateful to send them back out of the house and just walk around naked and be peace and quiet, you know? Like, that's all I want. So yeah.
And how about you, Brontez? What are you doing to keep sane during this whole thing?
Well, right now I'm lighting up this blunt. But in the past week, I recently graduated from UC Berkeley. I had my master's.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, I got tired of trimming weed, so I went back to school. And now that the world's even scarier, I'm going to apply for the PhD because I'm out of ideas.
Hell yeah.
And how about you, Keith? What are you doing to stay sane during this whole thing?
Well, I just started writing my second book, and I've been writing lyrics. I'm planning on making an album with a non-punk rock album, just based on a really bad relationship that I went through. And like I said earlier, the Circle Jerks, we were getting ready to re-release Group Sex 40-year anniversary, and we were going to go out and tour, and we had 70 shows canceled. We're just waiting for all of this to clear up and for things to get better. One of the things that I learned very early on in this is not to freak out, because one of the major things that nobody talks about during all of this is our immune systems. Everybody's talking about there's got to be this vaccine, there's got to be a cure. But the fact of the matter is I read a report that there's over 35 million viruses out there every day when you go out there. And basically, this whole thing rests upon how well your immune system can fight it off. So you don't worry about it. You don't freak out. You don't get depressed. You got to keep a positive attitude. You don't want to do anything that messes with your nervous system, which in turn turns around and messes with your immune system. That's how the majority of us are going to be able to get through all of this.
Thanks, Keith. And how about you, Alexander? Did you just finish your PhD? Is that what?
I'm still writing and researching for that, which is kind of ran into a problem. I was supposed to go back to Russia this summer and stay there for a while, but now I can't. So instead, I've just been home, just trying to grow these guns with, like, the home workout thing. So I've been doing that. As Feddy said, I just published an article on anarchists during the Kronstadt Rebellion in 1921, which is something that I actually wrote a long time ago and just kind of brought back out because of all this and the time that I've had. And also, still doing things actively with the fanzine, Punks Around, and trying to cultivate the right contributors for the next 2 issues, and trying to connect more with distribution. I have it covered in almost every state now, but there's still some places that I want to distribute to, so I'm trying to do that too. It's harder now because a lot of these independent bookstores are closed, or they're doing like online orders, and so I've been, in most cases, I've just been sending them copies and telling them to pay me back whenever they open back up and whenever things are back to normal. But so yeah, I've been doing that, writing mostly.
Well, cool. Well, I think if everybody's good, maybe we should wrap up the night. I think it's been a great night, and I think stuff like this.
Justin.
Yes,
Justin,
sir.
may I interrupt you? I have an offer to everyone, to every musician in here, to every songwriter. We can do something together, because it's quite easy now for me to enter into any project as a musician. I can play instruments and record them for you. So if you are about doing something like writing songs or whatever while staying on the lockdown,
All right. Well, put your email or your Facebook in the chat, and if anybody wants to be in touch, they can write you. So, hey, thanks so much, everybody, for being a part of this. First, I'd like to thank our American Sign Language interpreters, Allie and Andrew, for volunteering to bring equal access to communication for a deaf audience. This is deaf clapping, by the way. And thank you. You guys are the best. And thank you so much to all of our readers.
Justin.
This has been cool. It's kind of an experiment, right? It was kind of fun. It was kind of weird, but it was like better than doing nothing, I think.
Thank you guys all so much for listening to us and each other and everything.
No problem. If anybody wants to leave their camera on, I think I can stop. I can just pour myself a drink now. And a good night, everybody. Love you all. Be safe. Wear a mask.
Good night, guys. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Be well.
You too.
Be strong. Be healthy.
I love seeing the interpreters sign both jerking off, circle jerk, double penetration. It was like just great watching the interpreter.
What is double penetration?
What's the sign for that?
Let's see. Which one can sign it better? Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm just kidding.
That's the host.
Wait, show us.
I already signed it twice, so I'm curious what other people would sign.
You can see.
The host is also an interpreter. I wonder what he would do.
Yeah, Justin, you're also.
I have a moderator's hat on. I don't have to interpret right now.
Wait, that's it?
Wait, do it again?
Well, it's extremely visual, right?
Wait, this is double penetration. Oh.
Oh, it's not.
Like well, you're all right. It's
That's
very visual. I don't even know.
It was just 2.
That's rad.
I got to think about it. I got to practice, and then I'll send you a video when I find, when I'm really happy with my double penetration sign. I'll send you a video of it.
Oh.
And on that note,
right. Love you.
This is
Have
cool.
a great night. Really appreciate it.
Bye, guys.
Good night. Thanks so much.
All right. Be well, everybody.
See it.
Be well.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.